All right, welcome back to another video on shoulder anatomy and biomechanics. And what better way to do it than to do it with your shirt off? And I'll tell you, you feel weird anytime you record a video and you're not wearing a shirt. So, shoulder anatomy and biomechanics. The first muscle I want to talk about here is the major pec muscle. So, as you can see, it's a pressing type of muscle. It adducts, internally rotates, and assists with flexion. Now, the biggest thing though is you can see as you pull the arm back, the pec muscle gets put on a stretch as it attaches onto the humerus. If I go up at this angle, it stretches these fibers. As I change the angle of the stretch down, as long as because the pec muscle is an adductor, if you take the arm into degrees of abduction, it's going to open up and force stretch all across there. So as someone raises their arms up overhead, the pec muscle needs to be able to open up so that you can get that stretch across that tissue. The doorway stretch is a good way to do this. I like if you do the doorway stretch, I would just make sure you're hitting a stretch here, a stretch there, and a stretch higher up into the pec because it's this broad fan-shaped muscle all the way up from the manubrium onto this part of the collarbone. It wraps all the way down, so it's a huge muscle. Now, right below this, if we take away the pec major, we have the pec minor. And the pec minor, because it attaches onto the corticoid process, it will often pull the shoulder down this way. So if it's tight or if you're in this position a lot, because it attaches onto the scapula, it draws the shoulder forward. And then if you're trying to raise your arm up, that creates quite a bit of impingement. So the pec major opens up this way. Pec minor, think about it more as tips the shoulder back. If I'm tight to the pec minor, it'll draw me forward. So we need to be strong on the back muscles to get the shoulder to go from here into this position. So speaking of the pec minor, it attaches onto the coracoid process. The other muscle that attaches for the shoulder onto the coracoid is going to be the short head of the bicep. So the biceps run all the way down to the elbow. Short head attaches onto the coracoid, and then the long head goes up and attaches deep into the shoulder joint. If there's tightness in the front of the shoulder here or in the bicep, that's going to draw you forward like this, as I said. So both the pec minor and the short head of the bicep have this ability to turn the shoulder in. As I mentioned a second ago, what we need then is the serratus anterior and the lats to help counteract that pull to give it a posterior tilt of the scapula. So we covered pec major, pec minor. Bicep is another muscle that attaches there. The deltoid muscle initiates abduction, and there's three parts to the deltoid. So the anterior delt, the front-sided fibers of it, like right through this region, that helps raise the arm up into flexion and abduction. The middle fibers are going to be our main abductors. And then the backside of it, if I raise my arm back and out, that portion of the deltoid is what gives it extension. So extension and flexion, so our abduction in that angle. But you can think about it, the anterior fibers pull up and in, medial fibers pull out, posterior fibers raise back like that. What what I think is most important about the shoulder is really that there's these it's just a length tension relationship. So if I'm tight in the front, it's going to change how I can move on the backside of that. Generally, that's the problem because of how gravity pulls us forward and drops us into this position. So understanding that every muscle kind of has a counterbalancing pull starts making shoulder anatomy seem easier. Okay, so deep to the deltoid muscle, we have our rotator cuff, and the rotator cuff is four muscles that literally act kind of like a cuff all around the shoulder. If you look at a kind of fascial anatomy diagram, I mean that thing is like knuckled together where the muscles are intertwined and there's these deep fascial bonds between all of them. So they're deeply connected. When you think about the rotator cuff, we have our supraspinatus on top, infraspinatus and teres minor on the deep in the backside, and then subscapularis that runs from underneath here deep into the shoulder. Because of how they operate, when you raise your arm up, they reflexively engage in the shoulder. And then, so for me, a cue that I use to engage the rotator cuff is drawing the shoulders down. It pulls the lats in, but it also locks or rotates the rotator cuff muscles into position for work. So the rotator cuff are like these deeper stabilizers, and the way that I always go to engage those things is by pulling the shoulder blades down and engaging that way. Now, that doesn't mean I can't raise my arms overhead, but having connection back through there, you can see it engages the lats, it engages the teres. That's how I lock the rotator cuff muscles into place. Otherwise, your shoulder is kind of loose, and as you raise your arm up, it might create like an impingement type of symptom. Um, so rotator cuff is going to be subscapularis, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor. Next, if you think about major scapular muscles, we talked earlier how we're getting drawn forward a lot. Well, the opposite of that is the ability to pull the shoulder blade back. That muscle is going to be our boxer's muscle, which is the serratus anterior. So as I reach my arm out, like in different angles, you can see these striations there. That's the serratus anterior muscle. With that muscle, it helps upwardly rotate the shoulder and pull it into that posterior tilt. So as I raise my arms overhead, it helps draw the shoulder down into that angle. That posterior tilt is so important to keep the shoulder open, sort of in all ranges of motion. So if I'm doing a military press style of motion, I want to get into that position where I drop the shoulders back to give it good clearance for overhead mobility. Next, on the backside, we have our traps. So the upper traps are primarily scapular elevators, and they upwardly rotate. So they help with that action. You can see how the upper trap works in conjunction with the deltoid. We have the middle traps, which is the middle fibers of the trapezius muscle. Those muscles help us go into retraction of the scapula, so pulling back and keeping the shoulder open. Again, if those muscles are drawing it, retracting back and holding it, the scapula into position, we need to think about maybe our internal rotators on the front side are things that are pulling us forward. So the ability to draw those back is really important. So, and even as I'm doing that, you can kind of see that if you're not strong in scapular retraction, then you're going to use thoracic extension to do that movement. And so thoracic extension, if I lock out here, well, that kind of changes how my shoulder can move. You need to be able to hold your core in as you do scapular retraction. So you're not just using your spinal stabilizers to do that extend the retraction movement. And then last, we have the lower fibers of the trap. So if upper does this, middle pulls back into retraction, low trap helps draw the shoulders down at that angle. Now I'm also using lats to do that, but muscles work synergistically in the shoulder. All right, we covered pec major, pec minor, biceps, so we haven't talked about triceps. If the bicep attaches way up here and does this, well, triceps, they pull there and they help with extension of the shoulder. Now, if I'm already too tight on the front, then that's going to change how I can hold my shoulder position for extension. So when you do extension, get the shoulder down into position and then extend back all the way. That is going to help the tricep work more effectively. A lot of times people will be doing tricep stuff, but they're kind of like here already. Get the shoulder centered in position, locked up, extension of the thoracic spine, and then pull down from there because that's going to give you a lot kind of stronger, more direct tricep pull. That covers a lot of the anatomy of the shoulder. I guess the final piece I would say is, and we touched on it a second ago, the ability to use your scapular muscles is largely dictated by the position of your core and how well you can hold tension through here. So as I breathe in, I create tension through the diaphragm area, and I want to be able to hold that position while my shoulder moves. If I don't have shoulder mobility, as I go into that, I'm just going to arch my back that way to cheat for shoulder mobility. But drawing in here, so by the ability to hold that position and then get full movement, that gives me a stable base to move my shoulder mechanics from. When you're doing overhead shoulder flexion, there at the top of the movement, the shoulder should be able to drop down and sink into place. If you're having to hold shoulder flexion kind of right here, it's going to get really tired and eventually almost impingy or pinchy on the front of the shoulder. So as you're working through different shoulder positions, I want that upper trap to be able to work, but I also want to be able to draw the shoulder down so then I can help hold the shoulder into position. If I had to give one shoulder cue kind of to most people, it would be the ability to use the serratus anterior, to use the lats, and to use the rotator cuff to draw the shoulders down that way. I call this breaking the bar, where as I pull down into position, you can see how it locks all the rotator cuff, it locks all of this into position. That gives you the most stable base to pull from, to push from, and then even as you get into different positions, to be able to use the shoulder at different angles. All right, so that's my shirtless anatomy tutorial. It covers most of the major muscles of the shoulder. We got a little bit into like the stabilization requirements necessary for the shoulder. So remember, strong core position as you're moving your scapular muscles. All right, I'll see you on the next video.